Hey Angela,
Hi, how are you, Adam?
good. Thanks for taking the time to chat today.
Absolutely my pleasure.
Well, as you know, the point of our chat today is as C Trust, we really want to highlight the people behind our industry and the heart and soul of the industry and some of the amazing companies doing work in our space. So it's with great pleasure to have this conversation with you, and I look forward to seeing how it goes, which direction we end up taking it. So,
Love it.
Angela, do you mind starting by just telling us a little bit about you, your story, and your agency?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually came to third-party reproduction all the way back in 2007. I'm certainly showing my age, when I delivered my first child as a surrogate. And I actually went on to carry 6 times for 3 families. So I carried 3 children for one family, 1 child for a second family, and then 2 children for a final. In between my second and third surrogacies, I was an egg donor, and there are 5 children from those 2 donations that live in Australia. And then my husband and I have 4 children, and the last of our 4 children was born via IVF. So we used IVF to conceive her. So I've been pregnant 10 times, 6 of which are pregnancies for other people, 4 of which are for my own family. I've probably given myself over 1,500 shots, been through 9 embryo transfers, but I've been very much ingratiated in this community for close to 20 years. And I've had I'd say, luxury of really kind of seeing the evolution from things that we were doing in 2007 that would be considered so unethical now. And so I think it's a good perspective to have. From a professional perspective, I started in labor and delivery. I decided the bedside really wasn't for me, and I moved into more of a corporate healthcare role. And I did that for close to 7 years, where I was more of a project management healthcare care coordinator for companies, making sure that their policies and procedures supported their employees as best as possible. And then I took a consulting gig with one of the big 4 consulting firms. And after that, I really just kind of took inventory of what I wanted to do. I was not fulfilled by that work, and I didn't feel like that was something I could do for the rest of my life. And I kept getting that surrogacy bug. And obviously, I was long retired from being able to be a surrogate. But I reached out to the second agency that matched me, the owner of which I had become pretty good friends with, and I just got some advice, and I had talked to my former intended parents. And my big kind of like hang up about opening an agency was I'm not a salesperson. I couldn't sell a coat to a cold person on the corner. And my intended mother said to me, if you just talk about what you love, you're not selling anything. And there was something about that that really resonated with me. And I also knew that, obviously surrogacy hasn't been around for a long time, but we've now had, close to 30 plus years of, this, at least from a traditional IVF perspective, and then morphing more into gestational surrogacy. And it's been kind of done in the same way with the same model, just because that's the way it's done. And so a lot of people weren't aware that New York, prior to 2020, was one of the only states in the country that did not allow for surrogacy. And so, a couple of years before, when we knew and had confidence that that law was going to pass, I decided to take the leap, and I liquidated my 401(k) and I began business planning in Texas. That's where I was living at the time. And I thought, what better way than to create a new type of agency, because it's a new market and there will be an interest in that. As you know, the space is very saturated. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of agencies. And so it's very hard to kind of break in, especially when you don't have a private equity firm backing you, or, a lot of capital. And so I decided, if I'm going to make it work, I've got to find a niche. And so ultimately, I did a lot of surveys and talked to a lot of intended parents. I was working with an attorney who was helping me build my contracts and do everything compliant in setting up the business. And she was a fertility attorney, and so she would ask, "Would you mind if my assistant here kind of like picks your brain?" And I kept hearing these common themes from intended parents over and over so consistently that there were 3 or 4 things about the surrogacy journey that either gave them pause or that really frustrated them. And so I really focused on those 4 things in building my model, in trying to intentionally eliminate as best as I could those type of challenges. And so the things I heard from intended parents really were around, number one, big upfront fees, long wait times, ambiguity and just so much information, not really knowing how to navigate that when you're new in this space. And then also big agencies, small agencies doesn't really matter, but which agency do I go with? What's the difference? How do I determine what's the best one for me? So not only navigating the information, but the people. But I heard loud and clear that long match times and upfront money was something that felt very insensitive to them. And so I really looked at it from the perspective of what surrogacy was to me in my life. I think that as we should, what we talk about in surrogacy is the families that are created, right? Like that's the entire purpose. And so we want to see the babies and we want to talk about the families. And, I talk to people who have literally the light restored into their eyes after going through this process. And that's what we should be focused on. But surrogacy is also life changing for a surrogate, and it can change the trajectory of your entire life. It did for me. And I wanted to just use a quick example because I think that, there's a lot of focus on compensation and, is it deserved? Is it ethical? There's a lot of different opinions. But when you think about the importance of someone bringing your child into the world, that's a pretty big job. And it's a job that you have to have a lot of trust in team. And so I think that's obviously something that you need to ensure you find the proper team to help support you in. And I think people forget how amazing surrogacy is for the surrogate as well. And I'm just going to use an example. A couple of months ago, I got a handwritten letter, which in of itself today was so interesting, like a whole 2 pages of handwriting. You don't get those anymore.
Right.
And it was a surrogate that told me, obviously I didn't pursue surrogacy solely for the financials, but it was certainly a benefit. But the way I used my money was that I was currently living in a school district that didn't offer services for my child that was really needed, and he is autistic. And her surrogacy compensation allowed her to move to a school district that offered services. And she said at the end of the note, yes, my intended parents got their baby, but I got to hear my child say mom for the first time in my whole life. And so I think that one
Amazing.
thing that we always need to remember, I think intended parents sometimes feel almost apprehension. Like, why would someone want to do this for me? Why would a stranger carry my baby? And I think it's really important to remember, like, the ethos of what we do is really about helping families. And that's not just the family that's gaining a new child, it's also all of the families that help as a surrogate. And I know, I was a surrogate a lot of times, and I think it was not only life-changing in trajectory for me, it was really cool that my children got to see that process and how we helped people and the empathy that's involved. So, from my perspective, I really wanted to focus on that in the way that we built the agency and feeling that instead of feeling like we were talking to like a salesperson or a business
Right.
developer. So, frankly, the wait time, in my opinion, you can solve that so easily. You just don't take more intended parents. If you want to, keep your wait times low, you don't
Right.
take more intended parents. And so I just created a little bit of an algorithm that was super simple in Excel. And I did some research over a period of a year and I put some numbers together. And when a surrogate gets to a certain part in the screening process, I could tell you what percentage of them will actually pull through to be a surrogate. And if I talk to a certain number of intended parents per month, I can tell you almost within one or two how many will actually become a client. And so I only open up enough intended parent consultations so that those numbers correlate to keep our match times 90 days or less. And so I'm not doing anything different than any other agency. I don't have a special secret or a special surplus of surrogates that others don't. I simply don't take more intended parents than we have surrogates to match them with. And that has allowed us to keep our match times low. In addition, because our match times are low, we are not dealing with having to, do a first in, first out type of philosophy that a
Right.
lot of agencies with really long match times have to deal with. Since we don't exchange money before we've actually got a match, I don't have to worry about, oh, I've got to give that next surrogate to the person that's upset about their deposit. So I try to make the barrier to entry for the intended parent feel personal and authentic and not feel like, okay, hi, it's nice to meet you, and I'm really sorry you've had 8 losses. If you give me $15,000, I might have a surrogate for you in a year. I really focus on, my background, what I have done in this space, the way we support them, and tell them that we're going to do a lot of work on your behalf and you may never become a client. And that's how you know we're a good agency because we will have to earn your business. You won't pay us a penny until you have seen a profile that has been pre-approved at your clinic. You've had your match meeting and you know that this is a person that you want to work with. And so it allows them a little bit more freedom to not be so what I call desperate. You know, if you've been waiting 15 months, you're going to be a lot more likely to take that candidate in Idaho when you didn't want a candidate in Idaho. In a program with shorter match times and where there's no financial loss if you turn a surrogate down, you have an opportunity of choice and you can really have an intentional pre-match with your agency, which is something I think we do really well. We have a former intended parent that talks to all of our former or all of our we have a former intended parent that talks to all of our intended parents. We have a former surrogate that talks to all of our surrogates, and we have a 36-page pre-match. And we go down to the most finite details of this journey as to like where do you want to stand if you want to be in the delivery room? Like we want to know everything that you want. And we walk away from that with two lists, a mandatory list and a nice to have list, because a lot of intended parents get really caught up in all the things they think they need in their surrogate. And then when they have the conversation, they realize what they're just really looking for is a good communicator that's healthy, that can help them bring their baby earthside. So it's just a way for us to get to know them and for us to be able to present them with a match that's not just a surrogate, it's their surrogate. And I think there's a big distinction there. And being able to offer the quicker match times with no deposit has enabled me to kind of carve a niche in New York City. I also only work with certain clinics, so we have created kind of like a camaraderie and everyone works very well together because that's the people we work with on a regular basis. And so just that ability to know what they need allows us to have really good success rates like on approvals. I know across the industry, between 25 and 35% of surrogates are declined at either medical record review or medical screening. We
Right.
run about 8%. And I think that's because we are really intentional on the upfront piece in our matching, but also in our screening of surrogates. And so I think the way that we just kind of carved out a different way of doing it is how we've been able to see success over the last few years.
Yeah, it's amazing kind of hearing your background, right? The deep personal connection, the experience, how you came to the space. And then also seeing your business grow and your agency grow. When I look at the space, one thing that's always very evident, and you and I have had this conversation, is we're all in this industry to help people have their families and build
I
their families. I think when I look at the cohort of people operating, that's the majority, if not the mass majority.
agree.
In that, to be effective and consistent, we also have to run good businesses and
Yeah,
build good teams that so we can constantly deliver that passion and that hope to help people in a professional way for folks. Can you talk a little bit about that and your agency and how you've
yeah,
kind of evolved over time to be effective for
absolutely.
clients?
So I think, first and foremost, it was very important to me that every single person that I have employed has a personal connection to surrogacy. And that is because I believe the space to have so much nuance that unless you've actually been a surrogate or an intended parent or worked very closely, like at a clinic or in a capacity where you're dealing with the emotions of this process, you don't really have the capability of supporting an intended parent and or a surrogate in the way that they deserve to be supported. So for us, how we have really tried to make sure that we could set ourselves apart is by having a split case management team. We learned very early on that intended parents and surrogates need and are looking for very different kinds of support that need to be provided by very different kind of people. So if you think about sharing a case manager and you've got 35 matches, that's actually 70 people. And that case manager is responsible for putting on the surrogate hat and then taking the surrogate hat off and putting on the IP hat. And it can make everyone think that, is it really a safe space if she's also talking to my surrogate? And for us, having former intended parents work with the intended parents and having former surrogates work with the surrogates, what we did was create pods. And so we have an IP case manager that has been a former intended parent or someone that's worked very closely in the intended parent space for a long time, that is a single provider or primary contact for that client for the duration of their journey. They are paired with a gestational carrier case manager, those two people always work together. They don't ever split with other pods. And then they share a registered nurse or a clinical coordinator because we know that there's so much at stake during medical screening, embryo transfer. That's the time when a mistake can be a mistake that blows up the entire process, especially for people that have the like one embryo, a mess with a cycle could literally mean the end of their ability to have a family. And so we have a registered nurse, and then both of those case managers and all of those pods take care of their team in a way that's cohesive yet individualized. And, like sometimes it's a matter of an intended parent, like, just being a bit uncomfortable about something that their surrogate did or said, but they don't want to have to be the one to like upend their relationship or make something uncomfortable. It might not even be that big of a deal, but
Yeah.
intended parents have surrendered so much control. They are already so nervous about everything that they are anxious about how to communicate things that aren't just positive with their surrogates. And so, if you can go to your case manager and say, this surrogate did or said something that made me uncomfortable, or should I be uncomfortable? You can get that sounding board from someone that's been in your shoes. And maybe it's as simple as that case manager talking to the other case manager who mentions it to the surrogate. And now there's no break in that relationship. You're still cultivating that positivity between the surrogate and the intended parent. The agency isn't meddling. We're simply creating and being a conduit of positive communication for them. And then having that RN allows everyone to have access, to someone that can help them if they're unsure about a medication or unsure about a result. And it also helps us work with clinics. Clinics don't have to talk to a million case managers. They talk to three of our clinical coordinators. And so having that approach has allowed us to kind of make people feel as if they've got a support that is theirs and theirs alone. It's also better client service because they have less people. Instead of one person sharing 70 people, it's one intended parent case manager that only has 30 intended parents. Half of the caseload allows a lot more time to be doing the extra niceties and the extra type of education and support that I think all intended parents and surrogates need. So that is really, I think, how we have carved out a way to make sure that we can be the most supportive agency. In addition, I think that, obviously the elephant in the room around surrogacy is always money. It's,
Right.
not only surrogacy compensation, but just how expensive everything within the process is. And it's unique because other things that involve money involve a service, like you're buying a car or you're buying someone to help you wash your windows. It doesn't involve the intimacy of something like a baby. And let's be honest, a surrogacy journey is the most intimate thing that you are ever going to do with someone outside your own family. So if you do not have an agency that meets you where you are, you could have a lot of trepidation and a lot of feelings of nervousness over and above what you're already going to have. And so we've really focused on making sure that that primary point of contact can be their safe space, but also that we find a balance between this being a financial, but also a personal transaction. So that's why we don't ask for the deposit up front, because I want to give you a surrogate and the surrogate that is best for you before I take money. I want to know I can find that person. But in addition to that, I think the way that we stagger our agency fee really shows intended parents and surrogates alike how committed we are to being fair. And so, whereas most agencies, require a deposit to get on the list, and then you pay your agency fee once you're matched. There are a few across the country that maybe you do half when you match, half when you're medically cleared. We actually have ours staggered over four major milestones of the process. So our intended parents will pay their first agency fee when they, confirm that match. They've had that match meeting, the records have been pre-approved, and they're like, yep, this is the person, we're moving forward. The very first thing they do is have what we call the rules of engagement call. That's where they're going to talk about escrow. They're going to talk about insurance. They're going to meet their case manager, and they're going to learn all of the very finite next details. And then we're going to prepare to send their surrogate physically to medical screening. Once their surrogate's at medical screening and we get those results back and the carrier has been medically cleared, that's when they pay their second payment. But in the event that we have given them a surrogate that was pre-approved that doesn't make through medical clearance, in our program, you're going to get an automatic free rematch because our commitment, because our screening process is so robust and we go above and beyond, I mean, I don't know any other agency that does an MFM on everyone. I don't know another agency does full panel psych, home studies, all of it. And I want to be able to present someone that can see this process through. And if I can't do that and they have something that we were unaware of, a polyp or something in their blood, something that comes up in screening, we want to know they're going to get another surrogate and they're going to be reprioritized as a rematch. But once your surrogate's medically cleared, your next payment is not going to come due until the day of your first embryo transfer. And that actually came because we have so many intended parents that have one embryo. And that one embryo doesn't make the thaw. For me to say, I'm really sorry that you lost your only chance at having a baby. Can I have 8 grand? That feels gross to me. So you have to go through that embryo transfer and has to actually have happened. And then you'll pay for us for that next phase of the process, which is going to be to get you to pregnancy. Even then, we do not charge the last agency fee until the first day of your second trimester, because at that point, you have less than 1% chance that you're not going to bring home a live baby. And so we're statistically past those early miscarriages, chemical pregnancies, the transfer just not working. And for people that have limited chance, take that extra money and go on a vacation, do another cycle. But for a person that I've matched and supported through a transfer that does not succeed, that could be maybe a 6 month relationship. For an intended parent that we work with end to end, assuming everything goes perfectly, that's an 18-month to 20-month relationship. And in my mind, it doesn't feel fair and equitable that those two people pay the same agency fee. So what we really try to do is be intentional to make sure that intended parents know, of course, we have to keep the lights on. We've got to pay our staff. Some of this is financial, not only with the agency, but with your surrogate. But that's not the primary focus of why we do this work. Why we do this work is to build families. And if we can do it in a way that feels fair and equitable, I think everyone feels just more comfortable and has that trust in team that's so necessary.
I love the focus on fairness, right?
Yeah,
And how you're aligning that with actions. Something you said that I think is so important, and partly how sounds like you've organized your agency is I think if a parent surrogate has a great team around them at the agency and the professionals, they shouldn't have to have the hard conversations.
agree
They
100%.
should have the professionals have the hard conversations or the uncomfortable ones, and then their conversations should be focused on the beautiful process and having the
That's
pregnancies
right.
going and the future baby and the family. That should be the relationship and conversations that parents and
Yeah,
surrogates are having, not how is the lost wages calculated
exactly right.
or
And
can this be approved? Because with the right people, that can be completely avoided.
yeah, 100%. And I think, for me, that's a really good segue into just the support in general. I know it's going to sound so counterintuitive because I own an agency, so I'm talking myself out of business, but you should not allow your agency to have all of the control. That's actually one of the worst possible things that you can do in this process. And what I mean by that is a good agency, and I'm a corporate person formally, so I have corporate jargon and I apologize for that, but I look at the agency like the program manager. At the end of the day, we are not stakeholders. It's not our money. It's not our embryo. It's not our uterus. It's not our life on the line if something goes wrong. It's not us who might not ever be able to have a family. So our job is to kind of act as the glue or like as I say, the bowl of ice cream. And what we do is hold it all together. And that doesn't mean that your agency does everything, knows everything, and is in charge of everything. In fact, that's dangerous. You want them working with both internal and external partners that are subject matter experts in what I call all the little projects that the program manager is managing. So, you've got your internal team of support that should always consist of obviously case managers that can support your clients, both surrogates and intended parents. You need to have someone who can be in the mental health space. I think having an on-site on-staff mental health professional that can be on call when things don't go right is so critical to every agency. We work with an outside escrow company, but we have someone who on our team does the first round of checking, but we never make the approval because that's not appropriate. That's not our role. So they submit to us, we double check and do what we can, but then we ultimately pass that off to the escrow company who are the experts that are going to compare it to the contract and make sure that that disbursement is truly correct. check all of those details. And so your agency kind of is like the first level of defense. And then you've got the subject matter expert who's the escrow company. Same thing applies for legal. We have an in-house lawyer and paralegal, but neither of those people ever represent a surrogate or an intended parent because that's a huge conflict of interest. If you think about it, it's almost always the intended parent that gets represented by the agency. So let's just say we have, an attorney who's representing an intended parent, and that intended parent gets into a conflict with a surrogate. We can't also rep that surrogate. She now has to find her own counsel. She's now at a disadvantage. How are we going to stay neutral? Our job is to be neutral. Our job is to support intended parents and surrogates equally. And now we're forced to pick a side because they've retained us as their attorney. So even if the intended parents are blatantly wrong, it doesn't matter because we represent them. And so we have a team that helps shepherd it through the process so it still feels seamless and in-house to the client, but they don't have the conflict of interest. So the lawyer and paralegal help you to retain the attorney. They ask you, what are you looking for? Big firm, small firm? What's your highest priority? Is it cost? Is it, you want a queer person because you're a queer person? What are you looking for? We give them 3 or 4 names, tell them to reach out, and then help them to retain whoever feels the most comfortable for them. Then we provide the match terms. We help shepherd through. If, we don't get a question answered in 3 days, we're the ones that are being the squeaky wheel. So the intended parent gets the luxury of the support internally and also the luxury of not having the conflict of interest. Same thing goes for escrow. So I think, when you've got these all-in programs, when the psych is in-house, the, screening is in-house, the escrow is in-house, the lawyer is in-house, if something goes wrong, that agency has a lot of self-protection that they have to maintain because these are all their employees. And that to me feels like not the most fair for everyone. So, of course, we need an internal team of subject matter experts, and we have that, but they should be working with the external partners to be making sure we're all making good decisions, like things on insurance, things with escrow. So, I think that, your support team as a whole doesn't need to be all in the same entity. In fact, it shouldn't be. And if do your research and kind of understand how those things work together, it makes a lot more sense that you have your agency kind of act as the conduit of keeping everything together. I always tell my intended parents on my consultations that any agency that says they're going to make your surrogacy journey perfect is lying to you because there is no perfect surrogacy journey. Even thinking about getting pregnant on my own, that's complicated. Now you're throwing in another family, an attorney, and another attorney, a clinic, an escrow company, 2 attorneys. You're mixing a personal, a legal, and a medical process all together. It's complex, and inevitably something might not go exactly as planned. And you're not looking for your agency to create perfection because they can't. What you're looking for is an agency that is experienced enough to know, okay, when A and B happen, 95% of the time, C is the outcome. We better get on this so that that C outcome doesn't happen. They're proactive enough to stop whatever difficult situation could be incoming because they have the experience to know the patterns of how things happen. The same thing goes for, mitigating when things go wrong, making sure that the mitigation plan helps to ensure that whatever the impact of the negativity is as little as possible, because there are things that have to happen and there are things that happen that aren't always perfect and don't go the exact right way. So your agency needs to be the one that kind of softens that and does all they can to ensure that whatever is problematic doesn't land 100% on the intended parent or the surrogate, that they're being proactive enough to make sure that there are other accountabilities and other systems in check to make whatever is happening feel less gross to them because there are things in this process that just don't go there's a lot of variables. And, when you get to the delivery, you have no idea what's going to happen. All the best laid plans could go up in flames. And
Yep.
so we want to make sure that our intended parents know you already know where to park, you know where to get your wristband, you know where your room is going to be, you know who you talk to, you've got your social work contact, because that's what we should be providing. So you can go there and focus on the beautiful birth, this thing that you've been working towards, and not worry, do I park in parking lot C or parking lot A? So we can't physically be there and make sure that everything's perfect during the delivery, but we can sure as heck make sure that you're prepared so that all of the logistics are taken care of so that you can focus on what this journey is really about, and that's having this baby.
Yeah, and you talked about how there's so many different professionals that need to be coordinated, and I think that's completely true. And it really does take the whole village. I even think about as an owner of the primary escrow company in the space, the larger escrow company, it does take the entire village. It
It really
takes
does.
everybody working together. The agency is at the center of everything, and I think the agencies are, along with the surrogates, are the real heroes in the space that coordinate and bring everybody together and play such a critical role. And I couldn't agree more with your thoughts that you shared so openly around the separation of duties, because that also creates checks and balances.
Exactly right.
And when we do see things go awry, usually it's when there's something that was set up that should have never been in place in the
Absolutely.
first place, like a smaller agency holding escrow. So when you're holding the money and making all the decisions and paying yourself, that's a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. I mean, the big stories that you hear when you really dig into them, they would never happen with an ethical agency doing things ethically. They couldn't happen. I know that I am in the minority when I say that I want regulation because I understand that overreach and things can turn into, what was supposed to be a really good just kind of way to maintain a cadence of responsibility can turn into overreach very quickly. But as a licensed agency in New York, the Department of Health initially came in and did things like background checks on my employees. They did a private eye check on me, like a true private investigator that came in and found out that my son had too many absences at school. I mean, that's how in depth it was. They made sure that our contracts supported the surrogate and the intended parent bill of rights by making sure that we were in making the decision that the intended parent had to provide life insurance, that the intended parent had to provide separate legal counsel, that the intended parent was responsible for the medical care and the cost of that, that the surrogate still has bodily autonomy, can pick her own provider. In my opinion, the things that the Department of Health asked me to prove is what every single good ethical agency should be doing. And in 5 years now, all I hear from them ever is when I need to renew that license and I have to repeat that exercise. But what it does give is intended parents and surrogates alike a place to call if they're working with an agency that is not doing the right thing. And in New York, we're the only state that has codified abortion law, codified surrogacy law, and a Department of Health that has a number to call if you feel like something in your surrogacy journey isn't ethical. And so for me, at least in our experience, it's done nothing but create better agencies and more accountability because I know that if I try to find a loophole and hold escrow, someone's going to call that Department of Health and I'm going to end up losing my license. And so I think there's just an accountability that comes with that. And I know that, government and regulation and all of that is a rabbit hole we don't want to go down. And I know that it can become problematic, but we have to admit at some point we don't have a lot of regulation in this space. We don't have a lot of oversight in this space. And when I was business planning, I learned that about 50% of agencies close in 3 years and about 75% of agencies close in 5 years because people think that because they've been a surrogate or an intended parent, that they can run an agency. They don't realize behind the scenes the amount of risk, the amount of work, the amount of pieces that you have to put together. And so on the business side, you really do have to have a background that is either entrepreneurial or something that can give you the ability to run the business because it is equally as important as the way the clients are treated. You have to be making good business decisions because this climate is changing constantly. You have to be, making sure your projections are correct, that you're not overstaffing, not understaffing, and people who have not had that background are really going to be challenged in doing that. In addition, we have so many big agencies that are private equity owned now. To be a small or mid-sized agency is tough. I have, because we work with the majority of the same clinics, I'm competing against the majority of the same agencies because those clinics are, referring to the same group of people. And with the exception of one, every one of the agencies that are up against me are ones that are private equity owned and probably spend more money in a month on advertising than I do in a year. For a smaller mid-sized agency like us to be able to survive, you have to cultivate something that is different, unique, that really does provide something that this bigger agency cannot, because they're going to get the attention first because they've got the money to do so. So I think, when I'm talking to intended parents, also to surrogates, there's so much information out there. And listen, I was a surrogate that didn't have the luxury of Facebook groups, and I got a lot of really bad information from even my doctors and agencies. They were telling me pregnancies 8 and 9 were perfectly safe. We now know that's incredibly dangerous. I transferred 9 weeks after I had my first surrogate baby. I had my first surrogate baby in December of 2007, and my second in December of 2009. Today, it would cause outrage, but that's what the doctor said was safe. And so we're going to continue to learn more and more about how to keep this space safe and ethical. But if no one is enforcing it and there's no oversight to that, there will always be people that try to take advantage of that system. And so I think intended parents and surrogates alike need to be utilizing various sorts of information to make their choices. Talk to a lot of agencies, talk to people who have been through this process, talk to anyone that you know, and talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Don't be afraid to ask the tough questions. Don't rely simply on that one Facebook group, because just like there's no regulation, there's also no one making sure that there's fact checking going on in some of these conversations. And, we have a lot of surrogates. It's a pervasive problem in our industry that are really anxious about surrogacy because of the Facebook groups,
Right.
because they feel like they get competing information. They feel like, there are people that are acting as experts, and then they say, what is your experience? And like, well, I was a surrogate one time independently. How are you giving this information then? Like, why are you be considering, And so, you got to ask the right questions, but you cannot rely on one sole source of information. You've got to make sure that you're doing your diligence. And I know that that is overwhelming to a lot of people. So I always suggest that, if you've got a really good clinic and that's the first piece where you started, let them help you. Let them help guide you to who could be your next source of good information. And then you say to that person, okay, who would be my next good source of information? But using all of these partners like yourself, like C Trust, you know, we are obviously allow our intended parents to use whatever escrow they want as long as they're licensed, bonded, and meet, all of the credentials that are necessary for the New York license. But, I'm the majority of our clients are with C Trust in full transparency. That's, where they go. And I send them to you guys all the time to ask questions, all the time, because I am not the escrow expert. I'm not the one to be answering that question, but I know that I can trust in team and you or Virginia at Art Risk or, all of these other entities that are in this space that are doing good work. You don't have to take it on yourself. And in fact, it's better if you encourage your clients to get their information from a variety of sources, because social media has been great for connection. Social media has been great for advertising. Social media has been great for getting good stories out there about surrogacy. But it also has presented a lot of opportunity for inaccurate information, and then it gets shared, and next thing you know, you've got surrogates and or intended parents pushing back on things that an agency just can't do because it's unethical, and they don't understand why,
Right.
because Tania on the message board said that that's how I had to do it. And so it's just really important that we, focus on real subject matter experts and encourage them to really do their diligence, because picking that team is really the most important part of the process.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think when people look at the forums and the groups, it's like anything else. Know there's competing interests. Know
Exactly
that
right.
person may have an agenda, and kind of look at the whole picture, take what you can learn from it. Understand that it may be biased, but go talk to professionals you can trust and talk to a few people, right?
Agreed.
And put together
And that's,
your own
yeah,
perspective, because we see things in the groups all the time that are just blatantly wrong or
all
are
the time.
clearly biased, and industry people will know what's happening, but the parent who's come in there thinking it may be unbiased or factual may not know better. So it's always good to check your sources, right? So,
Yeah. And on
yeah,
that same note, here's the thing. Someone will come on there and maybe say, red flag for an agency. This is one I was reading the other day. If your agency does not let you talk to your intended parent until you're in legal, they are an unethical agency. And they make hard and fast statements like that. But there is so much more to that. And there are so many things that go into an agency's decision about when they allow communication. And they make those decisions with intention because let's just be honest, at the end of the day, most intended parents have a professional career because they can afford surrogacy. They're not all rich, but they have access to information and they have access to resources that sometimes surrogates do not. And so we want to try to equalize that as best as possible. And we can only do that if we're offering good information to everyone and making sure that everybody gets their necessary amount of information from the right kind of person. And so I think that there are times in which if the intended parent and surrogate have an opportunity to talk before you have a contract, how we do it is make them basically sign an attestation that they're not going to talk about contract terms. They're not going to talk about compensation because we've already decided that. We've done that in pre-match. We already have told the intended parent what the surrogate has been asked her whole comp package. And by accepting that match, the surrogate is promising to the intended parent that they're not going to go to contracts and change any of that. And the intended parent is making that same commitment to say, I will not ask you to come down. These are the fees, and these are the fees that we set when they see the profile and accept the match. Then they start chatting, and the next thing you know, oh, well, you know what? I don't need that fee, or this changes. And so you can still introduce conversation, but just hearing that one phrase in a myopic way, and then you're going to look at any agency that has parameters around that as unethical. That's where I think we get into trouble because you're looking at all cases in the same. And I think you're more than anyone can know how different every single case is. Like you can have the same exact straight couple in New York, basically the same kind of person. They want something 180-degree different than the person that is
right.
identical to them demographically. So, making sure that they've got the ability to have that access.
Yeah, and sometimes the advice, albeit wrong, is not ill-intentioned. It's just not informed, right? We
Exactly
see
right.
it. We see it all the time with escrow, where there's a group being promoted, some that are no longer around, over something they did well, but that individual may not know that they shouldn't be operating. They have a major conflict of interest. They're unbonded. They're unsecured. They have no background or
Absolutely.
experience. So that is a tidbit of information. Maybe they did that thing well and this other group didn't. But that's like one piece that you can take into consideration when making your broader decision that it's really important. And so yeah, I think that folks, so I think surrogates and parents should just be mindful to get lots of input
Yeah,
from different areas and just take the time to study every aspect. And I always tell people when you're selecting your team, make sure it's a team of people or a structure of a company that you can wrap your head around that you like, because that relationship matters so much and
it
how they
really
work
does.
matters a lot. This is a very personal, expensive, and emotional process. And if you have to like the people you're going through this with and trust that they have your back and are there to help you, even when things go wrong, most cases go well.
That's right. But when they don't, you need someone that has the expertise because when it can go wrong, it can go so wrong. And if you don't have someone that can help manage that, you can be in a pickle that you never needed to be in just simply because your subject matter expert wasn't present on your team. And I think that's something that's so critical for everyone to remember. Um, you know, I always start my consultations with intended parents because I still talk to every single one because I almost everyone is referred to me. I work by referral, like from clients, attorneys, other people. And I always say and recognize and hold space for the fact that I know that you do not want to be making this phone call. this you've exhausted every option. You've probably spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and you've spent more emotional capital than you can count. And I need to recognize and hold space for the fact that you are calling me because you have to, and this is not the way that you would like to be expanding your family. And I think it's important that we recognize that because, especially in situations where there's a woman involved, as a woman, I can tell you from the time you start watching any movie, it's about, getting married and having a baby. I think we're getting a lot more open, single parents by choice or single, no children by choice, but that's just like within the last 3 or 4 years. I think that there's this sense of loss regardless. Even queer people, they've had to process that I'm not going to be able to just have a baby in the traditional way, whatever path they choose, adoption, surrogacy, fostering, but regardless, it's not going to be my partner's going to get pregnant and we're going to go to the delivery room. And so I think that every intended parent comes to the consultation to talk to me, and they come because they have to. And if I don't treat them with the respect to honor that, that is not fair to them. And it kind of changes the dynamic because they need to make sure that we don't see this purely as something that's transactional, because it's not. And so that's why it's so important to, pick a team that you feel comfortable with. And I always use the phrase like, if your agency or the first consult that you have or the first kind of interactions, like there's something about that agency that kind of has a personality, most likely that's the kind of personality of the surrogate that they're going to attract as well. So if their personality resonated with you, it's most likely going to resonate with a surrogate that's going to be someone that's compatible with you. And so thinking about those things early and often are really important. But I think the other thing that I want to stress is the worst possible thing that anybody can do, and I think it happens really frequently, is kicking the can down the road. And what I mean by that is this: if you don't do the things upfront that you need to do that are necessary, it might not be immediately, but at some point in the journey, it's going to come back and cause a problem that you could have completely prevented. And so that's why, like in our program, we're so highly focused on screening. So, background check, sex offender registry check, minimum monthly income. We want to make sure they're not utilizing any kind of government assistance for food or housing. I'm not here to prey on destitute women who think that this is a quick way to keep a roof over their head or to put food on their table. And nor does an intended parent want that responsibility. We want someone who has an altruistic reason, but that the compensation is a piece of that. And then, we have registered nurses on our team that request all of the records directly. We get labor, delivery, prenatal. We also get updated PAP, OB clearance. Then we send all of our surrogates to an outside group of maternal fetal medicine doctors. Because if you look at the kind of the matrix of how this process works, firstly, my RNs do not have pure neutrality. They work for Alcea, and passing a surrogate is financially beneficial to us. So even the best RNs who are the most skilled and have the best intentions could have subconscious bias or could be looking at things from the lens of, you know what, maybe this will work. And I don't want this maybe this could work as the decision maker. So we work with an outside group of nationwide maternal fetal medicine doctors, which are just like high risk OBs. And, so you've got your clinicians that are RNs, you've got your IVF doctors that get you pregnant, you've got your OB who takes care of a traditional or just kind of a complication-free pregnancy. But a high risk OB can look at something like, you know what? She had two high readings at the last end of her last pregnancy. She had some labs that look a little bit off. I think next pregnancy, she is primed for preeclampsia. That my RN's not going to catch that. So an MFM, a true doctor, is the one that's going to make that neutral decision. They're paid agnostic of either their pass or declination. And then we use that same methodology with mental health. We do a three-tiered mental health with two outside groups that only employ doctoral candidates. So now another doctor of their field. And we do full three-tiered psych where it's a readiness session. And the readiness session is what it sounds like. Is this person ready for surrogacy? A lot of people sign up for this and have no idea the amount of work and responsibility that it is. That you might have to be at 4 appointments in 1 week before 8 o'clock so that you can get same day results to make sure that they know you're on the right kind of medications. They don't understand that if, the doctor asks you to do an amnio, you can decline that if it's your own baby, but you cannot decline that if it is in your contract. So a lot of that readiness session is, can this surrogate digest and articulate information that make the practitioner feel confident that they've got the capacity to actually participate in this experience and do what is necessary to be an equal partner with their intended parent? In addition, what is their support system? Have they thought about what they'll do if they go on long-term bed rest? Is their partner supportive? Is their family supportive? And it also gives that practitioner time to talk about anything in social history that we know intended parents are going to ask about. So divorce or custody agreements, is everything safe now? Is everyone cordial now? Is there anything we need to worry about? But, a lot of people can talk and say all the right things. And so we want to take it a step further. And then that clinician will facilitate what's called a personality assessment inventory, short for PAI. And basically, what it does is it gives us a kind of a bar graph with neutral, negative, and positive characteristics about a person. And everyone has all three. We've got some silly things. Everyone has some faults. There's a lot of them that are just, in one ear and out the other.
Right.
They're not important to this journey at all. The good and the neutral things are actually really good tools in our tool belt for matching, because you don't want to match a super type A surrogate with a super type A intended mother. That's going to be like oil and water. You want, that's going to be you're going to have struggles there because someone's going to have to surrender control, and that personality doesn't want to surrender control. And so we learn a little bit about how they resolve conflict by the way that they score high. Do they score high on empathy or intelligence? And so we can look at how they can be better matched with their intended parent. And in that negative group, most of them we ignore, but there are some tall bars that are dangerous for surrogacy. And so those can be declination items that we would not have caught in just by doing that readiness session. So some of those things are like hypochondria. You don't want your surrogate calling you every day with a pretend ailment. Feelings of grandeur or needing a lot of attention. Like, that's not the reason someone should be coming to be a surrogate, to be getting attention from another family. There's more to that psychologically that's unhealthy. The one that I love, and I always use it as a joke, it's called mismatched intentions. And it's the politically correct way of the mental health professional's way of saying that they're lying. Like, they're either withholding something or not disclosing something, or there's a pattern that doesn't make sense. And so now anytime I'm in a fight with my husband, I'm like, I think you have mismatched intentions, because it's like the most politically correct way that you could ever say you're being dishonest. And I
Yeah.
never knew that that was a tool that's available, but I know surrogate is no, I should say no intended parent wants a surrogate that's scoring high as a dishonest person. And so it allows us to have a little bit of insight into their personality. And then when you do the final part of that, which is the virtual home study, you're going to know that they really live where they say they live, that they really live with who they say they live with, that their house is clean and habitable. It doesn't have to be decorated, beautifully. That's not what we're looking for, but that it's safe. And then we also make sure within that home study that they have a reasonable level 2 NICU within a 30-minute drive, so that when the intended parents come to have the baby, they know that they've got safe medical care in the event that the nursery is needed for a complication with the baby. But doing all of that up front stops so many things down the line. And
Yep.
if you don't do it in the beginning, you're going to kick the can down after the intended parent has paid for medical screening. And if you would have just done that in the beginning and knew that they were going to fail psych, you wouldn't have wasted $25,000 and probably 4 months of your intended parent's time, because you just didn't do it in the first place.
Yeah,
So
I love
being
the
proactive.
combination. I just love the combination of passion, systems and processes that are informed by experience, and then just consistent execution. So it sounds like you're doing everything and trying to think through everything to ensure people have the best chance of success and the smoothest
Exactly.
process.
Yeah.
Angela, I've really loved our conversation today. I couldn't be more thankful for you and having amazing people like you in the industry.
Yeah.
Tell me or tell our listeners or people watching this, if they want to learn more about you or connect with you or learn more about Alcea and the work you're doing, how can they get a hold of you?
So you can go to our website, which is alceasuracy.com, and that actually has links to all of our social media. We have a really good educational YouTube channel that talks about this process end to end from both the surrogate and the intended parent side. We have a lot of people that have been through it, so real clients who have really been honest and open about the good, the bad, the ugly. the things that they struggled with. And so, the website will introduce you to any other social media, TikTok, etc., to find other information about us and myself. But I also want to know, from my perspective, I hear a lot of people talk about escrow. Escrow's been a big topic this year, especially with everything that's happened. It's becoming a bigger topic now. Like, we've got this kind of scandal going on in California with this kind of agency that wasn't doing things right. And for sure they weren't using outside escrow. I would love for just a way to tell my intended parents what is it that is they should be looking. Escrow is a broad term, and a lot of people that don't know about what escrow should or shouldn't do don't understand it. So when I say, you need an outside escrow company, they ask me a lot of questions. Can you give me some advice on what about an escrow company do they need to know, and what do they need to be checking out and making sure that they have or don't have? Because you mentioned things like bonds, and a lot of people don't understand how that protects them or how it doesn't protect them. And so I know you guys have amazing technology where everyone has access to see, and I love that, when I give you our contract and you get the GSA, you can put that all in there so they can see end to end when those payments are going to come out. That's an easy thing to talk about. But the technicalities of how an escrow agency should be run, who they should be looking for, like what kind of staff, what kind of bond, can you just give me an ability to tell my intended parents a little bit more specificity of what a good escrow company like C Trust looks like?
Yeah, I think as we talked about a lot in this discussion we're having, is when you pick your professionals, you want to make sure they're qualified, they're experienced, and they're set up properly and void of the conflicts of interest and things that could be problematic. I think when it comes to picking the escrow company, it can often be an afterthought. Um, and it's become more in the forefront recently based on bad actors. But
Yeah.
when you really step back and you look at how those bad actors were set up, either they weren't qualified or they weren't set up in a way that they should have been in the business of holding or managing money. When I think about what's called escrow in our space, what we really are is we're a financial company. And we're serving a role that's over a multi-year process with lots of payments and lots of parties. And we're actually, and C Trust was the one that evolved escrow from what it looked like in title, where they hold the
Oh,
money and send a
I
check
yeah, I got a
to,
paper. Believe me, I lived that. I got the paper check 7 day. I mean, all of it. I lived those days of that.
yeah. So,
Awful.
we said that's an illusion of protection. The escrow company should operate much like a trust company and a bank and actually take the responsibility to check the contract, check the receipts, and then also do it efficiently. So when I think parents and surrogates and agencies even should think about when recommending or working with an escrow company is, are they qualified? Right? Do they have the background and experience to run a financial company? Do they have the proper system checks and balances and security in place to do it effectively? Um, and then do they have the experience? And when I talk, they have the experience in doing this because surrogacy is nuanced and there's lots of things that happen, and we play a very integral and broad role. And then ultimately, are they the type of people that are going to stand up and do the right thing when things are challenging?
Right.
When I always tell everybody when it comes to escrow, I love that we have a lot of operators in our space. I think competition is healthy. I think when it comes to the financial companies or people holding money, they have to be qualified. There's instances where a boutique or smaller firm is good, but when it comes to somebody managing your money or holding your money, they need to have a certain level of security and checks and balances and oversight in
Right.
place and qualifications, or you should not trust them to hold your money, even if you like them. Right?
And
So,
yeah,
yeah,
being
so
a nice
that,
person does not mean you're a good business person. I've learned that very, very quickly. So
yeah.
yeah,
So,
that
and
makes
then we,
total
and
sense.
in all the instances of escrow fraud and escrow issues, 100% of them should have never existed in the first place. And we're coming from either a wrong or outdated setup, or again, a bad actor that should had no right holding the space, holding escrow. So just don't let it be an afterthought. There's lots of information on our website too around the security. Even if you don't work with C Trust, my advice is make sure you work with somebody that's qualified.
Okay. And my very last question, I know we're over time, but we have a lot of, so we have a policy at Alcea that if you are using an attorney that has escrow, they can also not represent you. So in other words, if an intended parent is using an attorney that also happens to have an escrow account, they need to choose that they use them either for escrow or for being their attorney. I'd love to know your thoughts on that because to me it feels like a conflict of interest because the attorney is representing the intended parent and they're also holding the intended parent's money. And in my opinion, it puts the surrogate at a disadvantage. Is there an advantage that you can see to a lawyer holding escrow? Is there something that I'm missing in that?
I think it's a major conflict of interest, and I think it puts everybody at risk. I think it
Right.
puts the
Yeah.
surrogate, especially, and the agency at risk. And even what the most intended parents don't know is most attorneys who hold escrow, generally speaking, aren't the best at it. That's not their core focus.
Yeah, their core focus is being attorneys.
It's a side project of business, and running a financial company takes pure focus and execution. Aside from
Yeah,
that, the conflict of interest is just too strong. And I don't think a surrogate or an agency should ever allow it because look, this is a highly emotional process. And if the attorney is representing the intended parent and holding escrow, and if the parent's off on something and can delay the payment that's rightfully due, and we see it all the time.
yeah,
And the outcome of that is if they can't get an agreement, if somebody's being unfair, then they have to hand it over to the courts. Whereas an independent escrow company, we're only tied to that contract, and we can bring in the parties neutrally
right,
and force and get work towards an agreement. Or if it has to be paid because there's not a real dispute or default, then we're going to pay it, and that's on us if we got it wrong. So
yeah,
that conflict of interest is too great. I think it existed. A lot of attorneys who are doing it did it before real good
right.
solutions existed.
You're exactly right. They were
And
doing
it's
it
kind
like
of,
when back when I was a surrogate, even 10 years ago, because there wasn't a lot of options. And so they did it mainly out of necessity. But, I think I'm glad to hear that you agree on that. And I wanted to, you're the expert in escrow as far as I'm concerned. And that's the advice and policy that we have. And I was wanting to confirm that you felt the same way that I did, that there is some risk there for an intended parent and a surrogate. And using someone that's completely neutral is really going to always be the best decision.
Angela, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a
Thank
real
you.
pleasure.
You as well. Great to talk to you. Have a great day.
Take care.
Bye.